March 15, 1994, Miguel Hernandez walked into Pablo Escobar's Hacienda Napoles carrying a wire and a death wish. The DEA had promised him a new life in America if he could get close enough to record Escobar's money men discussing their Swiss accounts. What Miguel didn't tell his handlers was that he'd already decided to die that night. His wife Maria had 6 months to live, and the experimental treatment in Germany cost exactly what Escobar paid his top lieutenants. 47 minutes into the meeting, Miguel's wire crackled to life. Escobar's men started reaching for their guns, but instead of bullets, something else happened. Something that would haunt Miguel for the next 20 years. The night Miguel Hernandez chose his country over his wife, the night that made him rich and left him broken. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silver Colt 45 gleamed under the hacienda's chandelier as Escobar's lieutenant, Carlos Mendoza, set it on the mahogany table between them. Miguel's blood turned to ice water. The ornate Colombian eagle etched into the grip caught the light, a weapon he'd seen claim 3 lives in the past month. "You hear that, Miguel?" Mendoza's voice was silk over razor wire. The crackling from Miguel's wire had stopped, but the damage was done. Every man in the room had their hand resting on steel. Miguel forced his breathing to steady. Maria's face flashed in his mind. Hollow cheeks, paper-thin skin, those dark eyes that still held fire even as cancer devoured her from within. 6 months. The doctors in Bogotá had been clear, but the clinic in Hamburg, the experimental treatment that could buy her years. "Hear what, Carlos?" Miguel kept his voice level, his hands visible on the table. 20 feet away, Pablo Escobar sat silent in his leather chair, watching with the patience of a predator who'd already decided when to strike. Mendoza picked up the pistol, turned it over in his manicured hands, static, like someone's listening. His thumb traced the Colombian eagle, like someone invited friends to our private conversation. The wire burned against Miguel's chest like a brand. $2 million. That's what Escobar paid Carlos monthly to move money through Panama. $2 million that could save Maria, give Sofia the mother she'd need for the next 20 years. All Miguel had to do was walk away. Let the DEA find their evidence somewhere else. "You're paranoid, hermano." Miguel reached for his whiskey glass, proud when his hand didn't shake. Too much Colombian coffee. Escobar's laugh was dry leaves rustling. "Miguel makes a point, Carlos. Perhaps we should be more careful about our refreshments." The drug lord's eyes never left Miguel's face. "Tell me, Miguel, what does a man do when he must choose between loyalty and love?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Miguel felt sweat gathering at his collar. Around the room, 6 armed men waited for his answer. Through the window, Miguel could see the hacienda's exotic animals grazing in the distance. Zebras and elephants bought with blood money, living in a paradise built on suffering. "A wise man finds a way to have both," Miguel replied. Escobar nodded slowly. "And a desperate man?" Miguel's throat felt lined with sand. The wire was still recording. He could feel the device's slight warmth against his skin. Every word they spoke was being transmitted to the DEA surveillance van parked 2 miles down the mountain road. Agent Reynolds would be listening, taking notes, building the case that would topple the largest money laundering operation in South America. But Maria was dying. "A desperate man makes mistakes," Miguel said. "See." Escobar rose from his chair, moved to the window. His white linen shirt was pristine, his graying hair perfectly combed. He looked like a gentleman farmer, not the architect of a cocaine empire. "I have been thinking about desperation lately, about what it makes us do." Carlos still held the pistol, no longer casual. The other men had shifted closer, forming a loose circle around Miguel's chair. The smell of their cologne mixed with gun oil and fear sweat. Miguel calculated distances, 15 feet to the door, 20 to the window, but Carlos would put 3 bullets in his spine before he made it halfway. "There is something beautiful about desperate love," Escobar continued, his back still to the room. "A man will betray his friends, his country, even his own conscience for love. But He turned, and Miguel saw death in those calm eyes. What happens to love when it's fed with betrayal? The moment stretched like a guitar string about to snap. Miguel thought about Maria waiting at home, Sofia doing homework at the kitchen table, the life insurance policy that would at least pay for a decent burial. He thought about Agent Reynolds and his promises of new identities, safe houses, American dreams. Then Escobar smiled. "Carlos, put away your gun. Miguel is family." The tension in the room deflated like a punctured balloon. Carlos lowered the weapon, confused. The other men relaxed their hands from their holsters. Miguel's wire kept recording as Escobar outlined the Swiss banking details that would destroy his organization. 2 hours later, Miguel walked out of Hacienda Napoles alive, his wire full of evidence and directions to $50 million in buried cartel money burning in his memory. Money Escobar had offered him as a bonus. Money he'd refused to keep his cover intact. The night that made him rich and left him broken. 3 months later, Pablo Escobar was dead. 6 months after that, so was Maria. 20 years later, Miguel Hernandez had become Michael Harrison, insurance adjuster, widowed father, man who'd chosen duty over love and spent 2 decades paying for it. Until tonight, when that silver Colombian pistol appeared on his dinner table again, in the hands of his daughter's fiancé. Miguel's hand trembled as he reached for his wine glass, the burgundy liquid catching the soft light of Sofia's dining room chandelier. The same tremor that had betrayed him 20 years ago when Carlos Mendoza first placed that pistol on Escobar's table. Some ghosts, it seemed, lived in your bones. "Dad?" Sofia's voice cut through the haze of memory. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." If only she knew. Miguel forced a smile, studying the young man across from him who'd just casually set aside the most dangerous artifact from his past life. Daniel Rodriguez, clean-shaven, expensive suit, the kind of confident smile that came from money and good breeding. Everything a father should want for his daughter, except for the gun. "Just tired, mija." Miguel set down the wine glass, his fingers now steady through practiced control. 20 years of Michael Harrison's careful, measured life. 20 years of insurance claims and PTA meetings and teaching Sofia to drive in empty parking lots, all of it built on the foundation of that one terrible night when he chose his country over his dying wife. Sofia beamed at Daniel, her dark eyes, Maria's eyes, bright with happiness. At 26, she had her mother's fierce intelligence wrapped in a gentleness Maria had lost during those final brutal months. Sofia wore a simple blue dress tonight, the one she'd bought for her job interview at the children's hospital. She'd gotten the position, pediatric social work, following the calling that had emerged from watching her mother die when she was only 6. "Danny was just telling me about his family's collection," Sofia said, refilling their glasses. The domesticity of the gesture, his daughter playing hostess in the small adobe house they'd shared since Maria's death, made Miguel's chest tighten. His father collected antiques from all over South America. Daniel's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. "My father had interesting connections in Colombia. Business brought him some unique pieces." He gestured toward the pistol with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. "That one has quite a history." Miguel's mouth went dry. The Colombian eagle etched into the grip seemed to watch him, its silver wings spread in eternal flight. He remembered Carlos polishing that gun obsessively, the way other men might worry a rosary. Remembered the weight of it when Escobar had offered it to him as a gift, along with the location of the buried money. "What kind of business?" Miguel asked, his insurance adjuster voice steady and mildly curious. Michael Harrison asking about coverage details, not Miguel Hernandez probing for threats. Import-export, coffee, mostly. Daniel's fingers drummed once against the table. He passed 5 years ago. Cancer. Sofia reached across to squeeze Daniel's hand. "I'm sorry. I know how hard that is." The gesture was pure Sofia, always reaching out, always healing. She'd been like that even as a child, bringing home injured birds, defending classmates from bullies. After Maria died, she'd tried to mother Miguel instead of the other way around, making him breakfast before school, asking if he was okay when she found him staring at old photos. Miguel watched their joined hands and felt the familiar ache of protective love mixed with bone-deep fear. Everything he'd built, every careful year of Michael Harrison's mundane life, existed to keep Sofia safe, to give her the normal childhood and peaceful adulthood that Miguel Hernandez could never provide. The dining room felt suddenly small, its terracotta walls closing in. Sofia had decorated it herself after starting her new job, adding plants and family photos, turning their modest house into something warm and welcoming. Pictures of her college graduation, family vacations to the Grand Canyon, Sofia's volleyball team from high school, the accumulated evidence of a life lived in the light. No photos from before Phoenix, of course, nothing from Colombia, nothing of Maria before the cancer. Michael Harrison's life had begun the day they'd stepped off the plane at Sky Harbor Airport with new Social Security cards and DA manufactured histories. The gun's probably worth quite a bit, Daniel continued, his voice carrying just a hint of accent that Miguel's trained ear caught. Bogota upper class, educated. But I keep it more for sentimental value. Reminder of family, you know? Sofia nodded sympathetically. She'd never known her grandparents, never questioned why her father had no family photos, no stories about his childhood. Miguel had crafted a careful tale of orphanages and distant relatives, just detailed enough to satisfy a child's curiosity, but vague enough to discourage deeper investigation. Family's everything, Miguel agreed, the words tasting like ash. He'd betrayed Escobar's surrogate family, watched his real family die from poverty when he could have saved them, and now sat across from a man who might be planning to destroy the only family he had left. Daniel raised his glass. To family, then, and to new beginnings. They drank, and Miguel tasted the wine's bitter finish on his tongue. Outside, Phoenix's desert wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. Somewhere in those hills, saguaro cacti stood sentinel in the darkness, ancient and patient as death. The Colombian eagle glittered on the table between them, and Miguel knew his careful, quiet life was about to end. The dinner continued with the mechanical precision of a nightmare. Miguel watched Daniel cut his steak, watched Sofia laugh at his stories about art galleries in Scottsdale, watched the Colombian eagle catch the candlelight with each gesture. Every movement felt choreographed, as if he were witnessing a play he'd seen before but couldn't remember the ending. I should probably put this away, Daniel said, reaching for the pistol. Sofia mentioned you work in insurance, Michael. Probably makes you nervous having firearms at dinner. The casual use of his assumed name sent ice through Miguel's veins. 20 years of Michael Harrison, 20 years of careful construction, and it felt as fragile as tissue paper in Daniel's presence. Not nervous, Miguel replied, just careful. Occupational hazard. Daniel's laugh was warm, genuine sounding. I understand completely. My father was the same way. Always thinking about risk, always planning ahead. He wrapped the pistol in its silk cloth with reverent care. He used to say that the most dangerous moments in life are the ones that feel safest. Sofia was clearing plates, humming softly as she moved between the kitchen and dining room. The same song Maria used to hum while cooking, a Colombian lullaby she'd sung to Sofia as a baby. Miguel wondered if his daughter even remembered learning it, or if it lived in her blood like an inherited scar. Your father sounds like a wise man, Miguel said. He was. He taught me that loyalty is everything. Daniel's eyes met Miguel's across the table, that some betrayals can never be forgiven, no matter how much time passes. The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Miguel felt his chest tighten, the careful breathing exercises Agent Reynolds had taught him all those years ago kicking in automatically. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 5. Don't let them see you sweat. Sofia returned with dessert, flan, made from Maria's old recipe. She'd spent years perfecting it, one of the few connections to her heritage Miguel had allowed her to keep. The caramelized sugar gleamed golden under the lights, and Miguel remembered Maria's hands shaking as she tried to cook during those final months, determined to teach Sofia everything before the cancer took her voice. This is incredible, Daniel said after his first bite. My mother used to make something similar. It's my mom's recipe, Sofia said, settling back into her chair. One of the few things I remember about her cooking. Dad's more of a takeout kind of guy. Daniel smiled. Cooking is love made visible, That's what my mother always said. Of course, she learned that from her mother, who learned it from hers. Some traditions run deep in families. Miguel's spoon clinked against his plate. Too loud, too sharp. Not all traditions are worth preserving. The words came out harder than he'd intended, and Sophia shot him a concerned look. Daniel's expression remained pleasant, but something shifted behind his eyes, a calculating coolness that reminded Miguel of Escobar in those final moments before the violence began. "That's interesting," Daniel said. "I've always believed that honor requires us to remember, to settle accounts." Sophia laughed nervously. "You two are getting awfully philosophical for dessert. Danny, tell Dad about the gallery opening next week." But Miguel wasn't listening anymore. The room felt suddenly airless, heavy with the weight of recognition. He knew that look in Daniel's eyes, had seen it in Carlos Mendoza's face the night everything went wrong, the patient satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. Daniel was still talking about art exhibitions and wine tastings, his voice smooth and engaging, but Miguel heard something else underneath, the careful precision of a man who'd rehearsed this conversation. Every casual mention of family, every reference to loyalty and betrayal, each word chosen for maximum impact. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a coincidence. The gun, the timing, even Sophia's new job at the children's hospital where she'd met Daniel while he was visiting his sick nephew. It was all orchestrated. A 20-year hunt finally reaching its conclusion. Miguel's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. His hands were shaking again, the tremor he'd spent 2 decades learning to control. Across the table, Daniel's smile widened slightly, and Miguel knew his reaction had been noted, cataloged, added to whatever dossier existed in the shadows of his carefully constructed life. "Actually," Daniel said, checking his watch, "I should probably head out. Early meeting tomorrow." He stood and moved around the table to kiss Sophia's cheek. "Dinner was perfect, mi amor." Mi amor. The endearment rolled off his tongue with native fluency, despite his claims of being third-generation American. Miguel felt the last of his illusions crumble like ancient paper. As Sophia walked Daniel to the door, Miguel sat alone at the table, staring at the empty space where the Colombian eagle had rested. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Phoenix police responding to someone else's emergency, someone else's past catching up with them. When Sophia returned, her face glowing with happiness, Miguel knew his careful world had already begun to collapse. "He's wonderful, isn't he?" Sophia settled back into her chair, still radiant from Daniel's goodbye kiss. She began collecting the dessert plates with the unconscious efficiency of someone who'd been managing a household since childhood. "I know it's fast, Dad, but when you know, you know." Miguel forced himself to nod, though every instinct screamed at him to grab his daughter and run. Instead, he watched her stack dishes with the same methodical care she'd learned from helping him with insurance paperwork. Everything organized, everything in its place. 20 years of teaching her to find safety in routine, and now that routine felt like quicksand. "Tell me about how you met again," he said, keeping his voice level. Michael Harrison asking reasonable father questions, not Miguel Hernandez probing for operational details. At the hospital. His nephew Luis was in pediatric oncology for leukemia treatments. Sophia's expression softened with the professional compassion that made her so good at her job. Danny visited every day for weeks. I'd see him reading to Luis, bringing him toys. It was so sweet. Miguel's chest tightened. A nephew with cancer. What were the odds? In his previous life, Miguel would have called it textbook emotional manipulation. Create a scenario that would naturally draw Sophia's empathy, then build trust through apparent vulnerability. But maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe 20 years of looking over his shoulder had finally broken his ability to see coincidence as anything but conspiracy. "And you're sure about the engagement?" Miguel asked. 6 months is... "Dad!" Sophia's voice carried gentle reproach. "You and Mom got engaged after 4 months." The comparison hit like a blade between his ribs. Maria's face flashed in his memory. 24 years old, laughing at something he'd said in that cafe in Medellin, before Escobar, before the DEA, before everything went wrong. They'd been so young, so certain that love could overcome anything. 2 kids who thought they understood the world. That was different. Miguel said weakly. How? Sophia settled across from him, her dark eyes serious. Because you were older. Because the world was simpler then? If only she knew how complicated the world had been. Miguel reached for his coffee cup, then stopped when he saw his hand trembling again. The tremor was getting worse, stress fracturing through 20 years of careful control. Sophia noticed immediately. Dad, are you okay? You've seemed off all evening. Just tired. The lie came automatically, polished smooth by decades of use. Long day at the office. But Sophia wasn't buying it. She leaned forward, studying his face with the trained observation skills of someone who worked with traumatized children. Is this about Mom? I know Daniel reminds you of her sometimes, the way he talks about family, about traditions. Miguel's blood chilled. Sophia had noticed the Colombian inflections too, the way Daniel's careful American accent sometimes slipped. But where Miguel heard danger, she heard echoes of her mother's voice. He doesn't remind me of your mother, Miguel said. Not physically, no, but there's something. Sophia's voice trailed off, and for a terrifying moment Miguel wondered if she was starting to piece things together. Then she smiled. Maybe it's just that he makes me feel the way I imagine Mom made you feel. Safe, understood. Safe. The word twisted in Miguel's gut. Sophia had built her entire understanding of love around the sanitized version of his relationship with Maria, the Phoenix version, edited for content, stripped of context. She didn't know about the fear that had lived in their house in Colombia, the way Maria would flinch at unexpected sounds, the loaded gun Miguel had kept hidden in their bedroom closet. Sophia. Miguel's voice came out rougher than intended. What do you actually know about Daniel's background? What do you mean? Her defensive tone was immediate, protective. Dad, please don't start investigating him like he's an insurance claim. I'm just asking. He's a good man. Sophia stood abruptly, moving to the kitchen with sharp, angry movements. He's kind, he's successful, he loves me, and he wants to build a life together. Isn't that enough? Through the kitchen doorway, Miguel could see her gripping the edge of the sink, her shoulders tight with frustration. 26 years old and still his little girl, still looking for his approval even when she was angry at him. The same way she'd stood in this kitchen 3 years ago, defending her decision to leave her corporate job for social work. The same way she'd stood here at 18, announcing she was staying in Phoenix for college instead of accepting that scholarship to Columbia. Always choosing safety over opportunity. Always staying close to home. Had that been his influence, or was someone else keeping her close? Miguel's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. Old friends sending regards. His hands went completely still. In 20 years, no one from his previous life had ever made contact. The DEA had promised him that everyone who mattered was dead or imprisoned, that Miguel Hernandez was buried as deeply as Pablo Escobar. But promises, Miguel had learned, were just pretty lies told by people who needed something from you. Miguel stared at the text message until the words blurred. His thumb hovered over the delete button, as if erasing the message could erase the reality of his exposure. But 20 years of careful paranoia had taught him that ignoring threats only made them more dangerous. Dad? Sophia's voice carried from the kitchen, softer now, apologetic. I'm sorry, I snapped. I know you're just looking out for me. It's okay, mija. The endearment slipped out in Spanish before he could stop it. He never spoke Spanish at home anymore, hadn't since Maria died. English was safer, cleaner, free of the associations that could drag him back to Colombia in his sleep. Sophia appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. You called me mija. You haven't done that in years. The observation sent fresh panic through his chest. 20 years of Michael Harrison, and one dinner with Daniel had him slipping back into old patterns. If Sophia noticed, what else was he revealing? His phone buzzed again. Another text, beautiful daughter. She has her mother's eyes. The phone nearly slipped from Miguel's suddenly numb fingers. They were watching the house. They knew Sophia was here, knew what she looked like, knew about Maria. Every careful wall he'd built around his new life was crumbling in real time. Dad, you're scaring me. Sophia moved closer, her social worker instincts kicking in. Your color's gone completely gray. Should I call 911? No. The word came out too sharp, too desperate. Miguel forced himself to breathe, to think. If they wanted Sofia dead, she'd already be dead. This was psychological warfare, designed to flush him out, make him panic, and reveal whatever they thought he was hiding. The money. It always came back to the $50 million buried somewhere in the Arizona desert, coordinates burned into Miguel's memory like a scar. The DEA had asked about it repeatedly during his debriefing, but Miguel had claimed ignorance. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with people who'd promised to protect him, especially with people who'd promised to protect him. "I need to check something on my computer," Miguel said, standing on unsteady legs. "Work email." Sofia frowned. "At 9 o'clock on a Sunday night?" Insurance never sleeps. Another practice lie, delivered with Michael Harrison's weary smile. "Go ahead and get ready for bed. I'll lock up." But Sofia didn't move. She was studying him with that penetrating gaze she'd inherited from Maria, the ability to see past surface presentations to the pain underneath. It had made her mother an exceptional nurse, and Sofia an exceptional social worker. But right now, it felt like being dissected. "This isn't about work," she said quietly. "This is about Daniel, isn't it? About the gun." Miguel's carefully constructed composure cracked. "What gun?" "Dad." Sofia's voice carried infinite patience. "I'm not 6 years old anymore. I saw how you reacted when Danny showed us his father's collection. You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Had he been that obvious?" Miguel thought he'd maintained his cover, but apparently Michael Harrison's mask wasn't as solid as he'd believed. Or maybe the mask had never been solid at all. Maybe for 20 years he'd just been lucky enough that no one had looked too closely. His phone buzzed a third time. The daughter pays for the father's sins, unless old debts are settled. "Give me your keys," Miguel said suddenly. "Your car keys. Give them to me." Sofia stepped back, alarm flickering across her features. "Dad, what's wrong? You're acting—" "Please." Miguel's voice cracked with desperation he could no longer hide. "Just give me your keys and stay inside tonight. Don't answer the door, Dawn. Go anywhere. Can you do that for me? You're terrifying me right now." But Sofia was already reaching for her purse, her movements quick and frightened. "Dad, if someone's threatening you—" "No one's threatening me." The lie felt poisonous in his mouth. "I just need to take care of something. Work thing. I'll be back in a few hours." Sofia pressed the keys into his palm, her fingers cold against his skin. "Promise me you'll be careful." Miguel pulled her into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, vanilla and coconut, the same brand she'd used since high school. For a moment she was 6 years old again, crying in his arms after Maria's funeral, asking why God took her mommy away. He'd had no answers then either, just promises he couldn't keep about everything being okay. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Whatever happens, remember that everything I did was to protect you." "Dad, you're scaring me." Sofia pulled back to look at his face. "What's going to happen?" But Miguel was already moving toward the door, his phone buzzing again with another message he didn't want to read. Outside, Phoenix glittered under the desert stars, beautiful and indifferent as a snake's scales. Somewhere in those hills lay $50 million and the answers to questions he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. The past had finally caught up with Miguel Hernandez, and Michael Harrison's careful, quiet life was about to burn. Miguel drove through the empty Phoenix streets with Sofia's keys cutting into his palm, his phone casting an eerie glow as he finally opened the email that would shatter everything he thought he knew. The message was brief. Click the link. "Your real education begins now." Against every instinct screaming at him to throw the phone out the window, Miguel pulled into an empty parking lot and clicked. A video file began loading, the thumbnail showing a grainy image of what looked like a hospital room. The video quality was poor, clearly shot through a window from outside. But Miguel recognized the setting immediately. Phoenix General Hospital, Pediatric Oncology Ward. The timestamp read 3 months ago. His breath caught as the camera zoomed in on a hospital bed. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, was sleeping peacefully, connected to an drip. But it wasn't the child that made Miguel's world tilt on its axis. It was the man sitting beside the bed reading quietly. Daniel. But not the polished, charming Daniel who'd sat at Miguel's dinner table. This Daniel looked tired, worried, his careful American accent completely gone as he spoke softly in rapid Spanish to someone off camera. Miguel cranked up the volume, straining to catch the words. His Spanish was rusty after 20 years, but he caught enough. The girl trusts me completely. Father is suspicious but has no proof. Luis is responding well to treatment. Luis, the nephew, with leukemia. Miguel's hands began to shake as the implications crashed over him. The camera angle shifted, revealing more of the hospital room. On the bedside table sat a small framed photograph. Daniel with an older man Miguel recognized from DEA surveillance photos. Carlos Mendoza, the cartel lieutenant Miguel had helped put in prison 23 years ago. The man who'd supposedly died in a prison riot in 1998. Miguel's phone rang, startling him so badly he nearly dropped it. Unknown number. Hello, Miguel. The voice was older now, roughened by decades and cigarettes, but unmistakable. Carlos Mendoza, alive. You're dead, Miguel whispered. Death can be convincingly staged when you have the right connections. The same way Miguel Hernandez died and became Michael Harrison. Carlos's laugh was dry as desert wind. We learn from your example. What do you want? 23 years ago, you betrayed my trust. You sat at my table, drank my whiskey, called me friend, while wearing a wire for your DEA handlers. Do you remember what I told you about betrayal, Miguel? The memory surfaced unbidden. Carlos in his study, talking about honor while cleaning his guns. Betrayal is a debt that compounds interest, Miguel. And eventually, all debts come due. Sofia has nothing to do with this, Miguel said. Doesn't she? Carlos's voice carried cruel amusement. My son has been very thorough in his courtship. 6 months of patience, of building trust. She tells him everything, Miguel, about her lonely father who never talks about the past, who flinches at Colombian music, who taught her to always have an escape plan but never explained why. Miguel's vision blurred. 6 months. Daniel had been manipulating Sofia for 6 months, and Miguel had been too buried in his comfortable suburban blindness to see it. The beautiful irony, Carlos continued, is that she genuinely loves him. Daniel wasn't supposed to develop real feelings, but your daughter has a way of touching hearts, doesn't she? Just like her mother. Leave Maria out of this. Oh, but Maria is central to everything. Carlos's voice turned contemplative. You want to know the real tragedy, Miguel? The money you've been protecting all these years. The 50 million you kept hidden from the DEA. We didn't even know it existed until 2 years ago. Miguel's world stopped spinning. What? A dying man's confession. One of Escobar's old accountants, cancer eating him alive, wanted to clear his conscience. He told us about a final cachet, coordinates known only to Miguel Hernandez, the traitor who'd helped destroy our operation, but kept one secret for himself. The parking lot seemed to tilt around Miguel. 20 years of looking over his shoulder, 20 years of paranoia and careful cover, and they'd only discovered his real secret 2 years ago. All this time, he breathed. All this time, you've been protecting money we didn't even know existed, money that could have saved your wife. Carlos's voice carried mock sympathy. Tell me, Miguel, do you ever wonder if Maria would still be alive if you'd used those funds for her treatment instead of keeping them buried like a dragon's hoard? The question hit like a physical blow. Miguel had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times during Maria's final months, watching her waste away while $50 million sat untouched in the desert. But that's not the real revelation, Carlos continued, his voice now carrying genuine satisfaction. The real revelation is why my son chose your daughter. Why this specific revenge, after all these years. Miguel waited, dreading whatever came next. Because, old friend, Sofia isn't just your daughter. She's also mine. The words hit Miguel like a sniper's bullet, precise and devastating. The phone slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering against the steering wheel before falling to the floor of Sofia's Honda. Carlos's voice continued, tinny and distant from the dropped phone, but Miguel couldn't hear anything over the roaring in his ears. Sofia. His Sofia. The little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest while he read bedtime stories. The teenager who'd held his hand through Maria's funeral. The woman who just defended her fiancé with such fierce love. Carlos's daughter. Miguel's hands found the steering wheel, gripping it so tightly his knuckles went white. 26 years ago, before the DEA, before Miguel Hernandez became an informant, there had been those months when Maria worked as a nurse in the cartel's private medical facility. When Carlos had been charming and protective, and Maria had been young and grateful for the work that paid better than any legitimate hospital. The timeline crashed together in his mind like colliding trains. Sofia's birth certificate listed Miguel as the father, but the dates worked. Those weeks when Maria had been distant, when she'd cried for reasons she wouldn't explain. Miguel had assumed it was stress from their dangerous situation, from living in the shadow of Pablo Escobar's empire. He fumbled for the phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip it. Carlos was still talking, his voice rich with 23 years of patient satisfaction. See how perfectly it all comes together? My son courts my daughter, never knowing they share blood. The daughter of the man who destroyed my life, in love with the son who will restore my honor. There's poetry in it, don't you think? She doesn't know. Miguel's voice came out as a broken whisper. Of course she doesn't know. Maria took that secret to her grave, didn't she? Probably thought she was protecting everyone by keeping quiet. Such a noble woman, Maria. Even dying of cancer, she never reached out to me for help, never told me I had a daughter who needed a father's support. The words were designed to cut, and they found their mark. Miguel had watched Maria waste away, had held her hand through the final months while $50 million sat buried in the desert, and Carlos lived his own hidden life, unaware that his biological daughter was suffering. Daniel doesn't know either, Carlos continued. My son believes he's executing a beautiful revenge, marrying the traitor's daughter and destroying her from within. He has no idea he's fallen in love with his own sister. The sick genius of it made Miguel's stomach turn. Carlos had orchestrated a revenge so complex, so perfectly twisted, that it turned everyone into a victim. Daniel, believing he was honoring his father by destroying Miguel's family. Sofia, loving a man who was both her soulmate and her biological brother. And Miguel, watching it all unfold, powerless to stop it without revealing truths that would destroy his daughter completely. The wedding is in 6 weeks, Carlos said conversationally. Unless, of course, old debts are settled first. What do you want? Miguel's voice was steady now, the shock crystallizing into cold purpose. What I've always wanted. What you cost me 23 years ago. My money returned, with interest. $50 million, Miguel, the coordinates you've memorized, the location you've protected all these years. Give me that, and Sofia never learns the truth about any of this. And Daniel? Daniel gets his heart broken when Sofia realizes she can't marry a man her father disapproves of so violently. Tragic, but people recover from broken hearts. They don't recover from learning they've been sleeping with their siblings. Miguel closed his eyes, seeing Sofia's face as she'd defended Daniel just hours earlier. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about their future together. The careful way she'd introduced the subject of marriage, wanting Miguel's blessing even though she was prepared to move forward without it. You're asking me to destroy my daughter's happiness. I'm offering to preserve her sanity. Carlos's voice turned cold. Because if you don't cooperate, Miguel, I will tell both children the truth. All of it. About you, about me, about Maria's choices and their consequences. Imagine Sofia learning that her beloved father is actually a lying government informant, that her real father is the cartel lieutenant who destroyed her happy suburban fantasy, and that the man she loves is her own brother. Imagine Daniel learning that his perfect revenge was corrupted by blood he never knew he shared. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Miguel's hand. Outside, Phoenix slept peacefully, unaware that a man's entire world was collapsing in a hospital parking lot. I need time, Miguel said finally. You have 24 hours. The coordinates, Miguel. Give me what's mine and everyone can walk away with their illusions intact. Force my hand and I'll burn down everything you've spent 20 years building. The line went dead, leaving Miguel alone with the weight of an impossible choice. The silence in the car stretched like a held breath. Miguel stared at the dead phone, Carlos's ultimatum echoing in the desert air. 24 hours to surrender coordinates worth $50 million, or watch his daughter's world incinerate with truths too horrific to survive. But as the initial shock ebbed, something else took its place. A cold clarity Miguel hadn't felt in 20 years. The careful insurance adjuster's mask began to crack, revealing the man who'd once walked into cartel compounds wearing a wire, knowing each conversation might be his last. Carlos had made a mistake. In 23 years of planning this elaborate revenge, he'd overlooked one crucial detail. Miguel had never been just a victim or just a traitor. He'd been a survivor. Miguel started the engine and drove not toward home, but toward the industrial district on Phoenix's outskirts. He parked behind a 24-hour storage facility and walked to Unit 247, a space he'd rented under a false name 20 years ago and visited only twice since. His hands shook slightly as he entered the combination, Maria's birthday. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth beneath boxes of fake Christmas decorations, lay the tools of Miguel Hernandez's former life. Untraceable phones, cash in various currencies, fake identification papers for 3 different identities, and beneath it all, a Glock 19 he'd hoped never to touch again. The gun felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory overriding 2 decades of suburban softness. Miguel checked the clip, chambered a round, and allowed himself one moment of profound grief for the gentle life he was about to destroy forever. Then he drove toward the coordinates he'd memorized but never shared, not with the DEA, not with anyone. The location where $50 million waited in the desert like a poisoned promise. The drive took 40 minutes through increasingly desolate terrain. Miguel followed dirt roads that barely deserved the name, guided by landmarks burned into his memory: the twisted Joshua tree, the rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the arroyo where flash floods had carved ancient scars into the earth. He wasn't surprised to find Carlos waiting. The older man stood beside a black SUV, silver-haired now but still carrying himself with the predatory elegance Miguel remembered. 2 younger men flanked him, bodyguards who looked nervous about being this far from civilization. "Miguel," Carlos smiled as if greeting an old friend. "You're early. I appreciate punctuality. Where's Daniel?" "At his apartment, wondering why Sofia suddenly won't return his calls." Carlos's expression remained pleasant. "She became quite upset after you left tonight. Something about her father acting strangely. She tried to reach you for hours before finally calling Daniel, crying about family secrets and lies, very concerning for a young man in love." Miguel felt the words like physical blows but kept his expression neutral. "The coordinates you wanted." He gestured toward the buried cache 20 yards away beneath an unremarkable patch of desert. Carlos nodded to his men, who began walking toward the spot with metal detectors and shovels. "You should know," Carlos said conversationally, "I'm genuinely sorry it came to this. In another life, different circumstances, I think we could have been real friends. You have honor, Miguel, even if you chose the wrong side." "Honor?" Miguel's voice carried bitter amusement. "You're about to destroy your own daughter's happiness for money. I'm protecting her from a truth that would destroy her completely." Carlos's tone sharpened. "Just as you protected her from knowing her real father all these years. We're more alike than you want to admit." One of the bodyguards called out in Spanish. They'd found something. Carlos walked toward the excavation site, his attention diverted for crucial seconds. Miguel moved with reflexes he'd thought were buried as deeply as the money. The Glock appeared in his hands as if materialized by 20 years of suppressed muscle memory. Carlos's bodyguards reached for their weapons, but Miguel was already speaking. "Tell them to stop." His voice carried absolute authority. "Tell them to step away from the hole and drop their guns, or I put a bullet in your spine." Carlos raised his hands slowly, speaking rapid Spanish to his men. They hesitated, clearly torn between protecting their boss and recognizing the lethal competence in Miguel's stance. "You won't shoot," Carlos said calmly, "because then Sofia never learns the truth about why her engagement has to end. You need me alive to sell whatever story will break her heart cleanly." "You're right," Miguel said. "I won't shoot you." Then he pivoted and put 2 bullets into the partially buried metal case his people had just uncovered. Sparks flew as the rounds ricocheted off steel, but more importantly, something inside began hissing and smoking. "Thermite charges," Miguel explained as Carlos's eyes widened in horror. "Installed 20 years ago. Insurance policy. The desert erupted in white-hot flame as $50 million turned to slag and ash, taking Carlos's leverage with it. The thermite burned for 7 minutes, turning $50 million into a column of white fire that could be seen from miles away. Miguel kept the gun trained on Carlos, while the older man watched 23 years of patient revenge planning turn to ash and molten metal. When the flames finally died, Carlos broke the desert silence with something that might have been laughter or sobbing. "You magnificent fool! You've destroyed everything." "Not everything," Miguel said quietly. "Just the parts that needed destroying." The standoff ended when Carlos's phone rang. One of his bodyguards answered, spoke rapidly in Spanish, then turned pale. "Señor Mendoza, there's been a raid. Phoenix police hit Daniel's apartment. He's been arrested." Miguel allowed himself a small smile. The untraceable phone in his storage unit had sent a single text message to Detective Sarah Chen, his one remaining contact in law enforcement. "Check apartment 304, Desert Springs Complex. Daniel Castellanos. Outstanding warrants under real name Daniel Mendoza. Armed and dangerous." Carlos's empire was already crumbling, and he didn't even know it yet. "Take your men and go," Miguel said. "Leave Phoenix, leave Arizona. Never contact my family again." "And if I refuse?" Miguel's expression never changed. "Then we finish this here, and Sofia grows up believing both her fathers died in the desert." Carlos studied Miguel's face for a long moment, perhaps recognizing something he'd seen in his own mirror for decades, the kind of cold certainty that came from having nothing left to lose. He nodded to his men. They retreated to their vehicle without another word. Miguel waited until their taillights disappeared before lowering the gun. Only then did his hands begin to shake. The drive home took place in pre-dawn darkness, giving him time to rehearse the conversation that would either save or destroy his relationship with Sofia forever. Not the whole truth. She would never learn about Carlos, or about the blood connection that had made Daniel's love story into something twisted and impossible. But enough truth to matter. He found her on the living room couch, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by wadded tissues and the detritus of a sleepless night. Her eyes were red-rimmed and furious. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I called you 20 times. Daniel was arrested tonight, Dad." "Arrested? They're saying he had fake identification, that he's wanted in connection with drug trafficking. I don't understand any of this." Miguel sat across from her, suddenly feeling every one of his 58 years. "Sofia, there are things about my life before you were born that I've never told you." "What kind of things?" "The kind that meant we had to leave Colombia when you were a baby. The kind that meant I changed our names and spent 20 years looking over my shoulder." Miguel met her eyes steadily. Daniel wasn't who he claimed to be. His real name is Daniel Mendoza. His family, they had reasons to want to hurt me. Sofia's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something approaching horror. "Are you saying he was using me? That everything we had was fake?" Miguel remembered Carlos's words. "She genuinely loves him." "Daniel wasn't supposed to develop real feelings, but your daughter has a way of touching hearts." "Not everything," he said gently. "I think he fell in love with you despite himself. But yes, the initial approach was calculated." Sofia curled into herself on the couch, arms wrapped around her knees like a child seeking shelter. 26 years old, and I still don't know anything real about my own life. "You know the things that matter." Miguel moved to sit beside her. "You know your mother loved you more than breathing. You know I would do anything to keep you safe. You know you're strong enough to survive this. I don't feel strong." Strength isn't about feeling invincible. It's about getting up anyway when everything falls apart. Miguel hesitated, then added, "Your mother taught me that." They sat in silence as Phoenix woke up around them. Traffic sounds filtered through the windows. Neighbors started their cars for the morning commute, the ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives. "Will you tell me the rest someday?" Sofia asked eventually. "The real story about Colombia and why we had to run?" "Someday," Miguel promised. "When you're ready for stories that don't have happy endings." 6 months later, Miguel sold the house in Phoenix. They moved to Portland, where Sofia started graduate school in social work. and Miguel found work with a non-profit that helped refugees navigate immigration services. It wasn't much, but it felt like penance, like redemption. On quiet evenings, he would catch Sophia staring out windows with an expression he recognized from his own mirror, the look of someone learning to carry secrets. But she was adapting, finding ways to channel her pain into purpose. She worked with women escaping domestic violence, helping them rebuild identities and lives. Sometimes Miguel wondered if she suspected there were still truths he hadn't shared. But she never asked, and he never volunteered. Some mercies were meant to be preserved. The past, Miguel had learned, wasn't something you escaped, but with enough courage and careful love, it could be transformed into something bearable, something that looked almost like peace.